Hello. In the Crown of Aragon, 639 years ago, it was December 26th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Molt Cara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Here's the basic profile of today's document. It's written by Joan, and the place that it's sent from is Girona. Girona is about 100 kilometers, like an hour's drive from Barcelona, up along the coast, but Girona is not a coastal city, it's inland a bit. Girona is about halfway between Barcelona and Perpignan. So, Joan is the Duke of Girona. It's the seat of his political station as the firstborn son of the king. The Duke of Girona is typically the one who's next in line for the throne. So what we're looking at here is a letter of about 11 lines. And if you took a look at the letter from episode 1, you might have noticed that it's not in a script that's very easy to read without practice. So I'm going to take a little bit of time before getting into the content of this letter from Joan today and discuss a few ways to navigate, at least for beginners, the letters that we're looking at in these registers. So first of all, the archival reference number for today's document is ACA-CR R1675 F19V. Let's break that down. ACA stands for Archive of the Crown of Aragon. CR stands for Cancilleria Real, the Royal Chancery. R is for Registro, which is basically like the name for the bound volume. The number 1675 is that register's number in the overall scheme of how these volumes are numbered, which was actually not assigned at the time. That numbering scheme was put together by later archivists, like centuries later. The F stands for folio. It's not page. It's sort of like page, but each page is numbered on the front, on the upper right hand corner, and then the back is unnumbered. So if you're looking through these scanned images on Pares, what you're going to find is that in order to get to the back of folio 19, it's actually going to be something like image number 38, because each image has its own number, but the pagination, the way that the pages are numbered, is that only the front is numbered. So the V, the letter at the very end of this document's reference, is for verso. Okay, The front of a page, the front of a folio more accurately, is called the recto, and then the back is called the verso. So we're almost always going to be seeing reference numbers that end in either R or V. So that's a little bit about the reference number, but when we get to the page itself, we're going to be looking today actually at the lower third of the page. There are a couple other letters on this page. Well, there's the ending of one that began on the recto side of folio 19. That's at the top. And then in the middle, there's a full letter. That one is to the Pope. And there's some interesting repair work that's been done to the page that you can see on that letter. And then the one that's the focus of our attention today is actually concluded by the bottom of the page. And it has a top, El Primo... Oh boy, what does that say? El Primogenito d'Arago. So that translates to the firstborn of Aragon. All right. This was a title. Primogenite was a title. It doesn't seem to be saying it in Catalan. The ending there is a little bit confusing to me because I would sort of expect something like primogenite, but there's clearly an O at the end, which I'm not quite sure why. The line that's above the word, and there's also a similar kind of line above d'Arago, that is called in paleography a macron, and it indicates that there's been a letter left out of the word, and the macron indicates that there's an abbreviation happening because the letter has been left out. So for d'Arago, it's really clear that the macron is standing in for the letter N. So basically, that word is d'Aragon, for of Aragon. Just to the right of that title, or I guess it's more like an attribution heading of what's going to be our document at the bottom of the page. To the right is information that corresponds to the letter above. So this is a pretty typical thing, and you'll see it again at the bottom of the page. And this symbol stands for probata, and that is a word that means essentially authorized. So what's happening here is that at the bottom of the letter, the scribe is putting his authorization onto this document to assert its accuracy. He's basically vouching for it. So we have at the end of the middle letter, above the squiggly P, you see another P, and that is abbreviated. There's like a P dot, and then above it there's like a circle. I think that the abbreviation there is something like Pedro, but I'm not sure. And then at the bottom, it's very clear what's going on above the probata symbol. There's the letter I, D, M with a macron. And here it is the Latin word idem. That means likewise. So what is indicated by that is the person who copied and authorized the accuracy of that copy for the middle letter on the page has also done so for the bottom letter. One other thing I want to point out here, if you're able to look at this along with me, hopefully you are, the last word at the bottom left of the page is Rodi, Rodi, and that is Rhodes. And the first word of the letter is maestre, master of Rhodes. So the recipient of this document is the master of Rhodes. It's not really clear who that is. I've done some reading on this, and I know that the master of Rhodes at this time was Juan Fernández de Heredia, who was actually a pretty frequent correspondent of Joan and Violante. And this was the person that was in charge of the Hospitallers, the order of the Hospitallers, sort of like an equivalent of the Knights Templar. And so Joan is writing to the head of this religious order, the Hospitallers, and is recommending a fellow named Bernard Maloll for a position at a monastery. Now, the context that's super important for understanding this document is the Western Schism of 1378, in which there started to be two popes, one in Rome and one in Avignon. Joan's father, Pere, attempted to maintain neutrality as this all unfolded, but eventually, pretty much by the mid-1380s, Joan had firmly taken the side of Avignon. And so the pope being written to in the letter above is most likely the Avignon pope, and understanding the intervention of the Duke in an ecclesiastical appointment has got to be something that will be made more clear if I am able to learn more about how the Western Schism shifted the relations between the secular political authorities and the ecclesiastical authorities in the Crown of Aragon, and then how this extra organization, the Knights Hospitallers, had a role to play in all of that. And this is something I really don't know about. But beyond that, a bunch of other questions come up when I'm thinking about what I know about this document thus far. First of all, who was Bernardo Maloll, and was he a shoo-in for this appointment, or did there need to be a lot of advocating for him? Was he something of a long shot? Was there a competitor? And this letter, is it just a routine thing, or was it something unusual for Joan to be intervening like this? Now, I'm also curious about how this moment here represents that larger context that I was talking about a moment ago. Is the Master of Rhodes going to be playing a really big role in this? And then, of course, I'm trying to limit myself to just one document each day, but I can't help thinking about the letter to the Pope that's right above this one. And I didn't do that one today because it's in Latin and it's much more difficult for me. But I am really curious about it because I'm wondering whether the Pope actually involved himself in appointments at this level, because this is not a bishop, it's not an archbishop. It seems, from what I can tell, like these are kind of small monasteries. So I'm really wondering about whether the papal bureaucracy would have just handled this, and if the Pope would have even read that letter, or maybe got a summary from one of the officials or bureaucrats. I don't know. I'd be, I guess, surprised if the Pope actually read this letter in full from someone who's not a monarch yet. But maybe the Pope is like, yeah, this dude's going to be king really soon, so I'm going to read this. It's a question mark. And that brings us to the end of this episode, where we're, remember, just doing an initial sweep through these documents. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I have done my job. Because remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Please try to visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.